Hola, how is everybody? I hope you're well. And today is a very special day. I have a special guest. We are welcoming Monika Antas, cognitive behavioral.
Hi.
Hi, Monika. And also, she has an extensive background as a social worker. So she's got lots of experience working with people, especially people who are vulnerable. And today we want to cover mainly what stress, the impact that stress and emotions and language has in our lives, in our health and lack thereof. So we know that the biggest cause of disease and death is stress. And it's not like when somebody dies, they say, yeah, they don't go and say, yes, he or she died of stress. It's not an actual um, death diagnosis. But the thing is that stress has this power to change um, the structure of the cells and the tissues and the nerve tissue as well, which in turn causes things like heart disease,
So
diabetes.
we know that there is this link between mental health and physical health, and we talked about that previously, did we, Anna? That it goes hand in hand. So if people have mental health problems, they kind of risk of developing health problems, physical health problems, as increasing, and then if they have poor physical health, they're likely to develop mental health problems. And like you said, often we say cardiovascular disease, this is the top, killer. But what we know is underneath that, there may be a lot of stress and there may be kind of psychological distress and things that are impacting on how we feel physically. So the increased blood pressure and all the other things that are happening when people are experiencing acute stress response, for example.
Yeah, because as you said, if somebody is mentally not in a very good place, they may not take the best care of their bodies. So they may not eat properly and they may not exercise because they are too busy in their minds. They're probably exhausted only just by overthinking and going over and over the same thing, whatever traumatic experience they keep going back to. And in turn, if you are physically not in a good condition, then so if you don't go for walks or if you don't get out, if you don't exercise, if you don't eat the right foods, then your mental state is really going to feel that. Because
Social isolation as well, for example, sorry to interrupt you, which is a big thing. So I'm just gonna try to maybe.
I just got a message to say that my mic is that my, oh, thank you so much.
So much better. Wow.
That's good. Okay.
Thanks, Leandra. Leandra, she's listening to the whole conversation. She's going to join us in a few minutes' time. She's got some a very, very interesting experience that, I would like her to talk to us about. Some of these diseases, they are easily diagnosed because the structural damage that stress or emotional stress or work-related stress, financial stress causes in the body can be measured and by Western medicine parameters. And this is because of the structural damage that then develops into different illnesses. But how about this this is the thing, how about these other disorders that cannot be diagnosed easily because they don't seem to have a measurable and identifiable onset? Right? This leads us to theorize that these functional disorders or somatoform disorders, as some professionals call them, they have a a root in the mind and the
Yeah.
emotions. And what's unfortunate is that many health professionals don't concern themselves, they barely concern themselves with mind and emotional states
Yeah.
and the effect that this has in your health.
I think there is growing, the understanding of that body and mind connection is growing, and people are getting better at recognizing that, if you've got, for example, depression, then that will affect how you feel, that will affect your sleep. And then if you sleep deprived, then the consequences of that are poor concentration or, other things that are happening. So there is a very strong link. And I think we are getting better. People are professionals as well as, population are getting better at perhaps recognizing that. But I think it's, we have to keep talking about that to bring that awareness and like you said, maybe do that or be more kind of willing to take that holistic approach to treating people.
And come away from the reductionist approach, the Cartesian dualism proposed by Descartes, where Western medicine evolved from. And this is a split between the mind and the body as if they are two different things. But what we are learning is that there isn't such separation.
No.
And so reductionism recognizes the parts in isolation from one another, whereas holism, which is the alternative from reductionism, recognizes that the parts interact with one another, influence one another. Holism recognizes the glue that holds all the parts together and how important that glue is. And it's like the fascia, for example, the fascia, which is, I don't know if you know this, what the fascia is, or for people that don't know what it is, it's very simply put, it's like a second skin underneath our skin. And it's like a sheath that surrounds, it surrounds every single muscle, tendon, ligament, nerve, blood vessel, and which is also why it's called the connective tissue, because it connects everything. Now, the fascia, we only know about it we only found out about it quite recently in the West, whereas in the Chinese knew about it 5,000 years ago, but in the West, we rely so much on technology that we could not see it until recently, because it doesn't come up in the MRI scans, it doesn't come up in the X-rays, and probably when they were...
It's not easily visible, isn't it? We always talk about that. People talk about that, in terms of psychological problem, at least, that they say, well, we can't see that. But actually, the physical symptoms are there.
Yeah, it is a reality.
Yes.
And well, the same with the black matter in the universe. Vera Rubin, the astronomer, she discovered the black matter, which is the glue that holds the universe together. Is such an important thing. It was the most significant discovery of the 20th century. And so we have reductionism and then holism, and holism is more relational, and it identifies the different layers which make a human. So that's environmental, religious, socio-cultural, emotional, psychological, hormonal. So a person's health or lack thereof is influenced by many factors that are external to whatever structural processes are going on in the body, and as you say, we are starting to understand this, which is one of the amazing things, is that mindfulness trend that came brushing everybody's it's fantastic. So when it comes to for example, autoimmune diseases,
Mm-hmm.
hypothyroidism, chronic
Yes.
fatigue syndrome. What the usual care tends to do, if you go to your GP, they will probably try and find the diagnosis. There is a big focus on finding the diagnosis and the
Because if you don't have diagnosis, then you can't access treatment. So that's how the system is built in a way. Unless you can fit the criteria for something, then you can actually be offered treatment. So that's how our systems are built in that way. And I think what you are referring to in terms of sometimes unexplained medical symptoms, like there is pain, but there is no kind of evidence. Where is this coming from? And it's really interesting from my point of view, and what I've learned and what I've read is that, you know, a lot of people with past trauma, multiple, very severe, they had horrific experiences in childhood, for example, there is kind of a lot of research that will link or will say they complain about pain. So there's this link between trauma and pain in research, which is really interesting for me, for example. But I guess when you think about that psychological side of, you know, what happens when you have PTSD, you are re-experiencing something and you are constantly in that, responding to that threat, so that that response to acute stress is generated and your body is responding by breathing faster, the hormonal changes, the adrenaline, cortisol is released, the muscles are tensing because you're preparing for fight, flight, or freeze. So if that is happening all the time, which is the case with PTSD, your body will be in pain.
Yeah, it's the overload of the sympathetic nervous system, isn't it? Because somehow, and this is what's very interesting about injury and disease and trauma and the response to trauma, is that the response to trauma, when it is happening, it's an adaptive response, a protection mechanism, which is natural and it's healthy. Now, the problem comes when we attach to that response. And what makes people attached to it? What makes them attached to it and sustain the trauma?
So from my point of view, and from I know or from what I deal on day-to-day basis in terms of working with PTSD, I agree with you. It's a normal response to abnormal situation. What's happening to that person, their safety might be threatened. They are responding by using that survival system of I'm going to either fight, flee, or freeze. And then they got stuck in that in terms of, because it's so huge, the brain finds it very difficult to process that memory. So the re-experiencing keep happening. So they might see something that looks, smells, or feels like that traumatic event, and they're back in that moment when that is happening. So the body is again responding accordingly because the alarm system is activated. So again, all the changes are happening in the body, and they're going through that horrible experience again. So that is from my perspective, and what kind of I do is help them to process that memory, and then make sense of what happened to people, and then move on in terms of, so they are not experiencing flashbacks or nightmares, for example.
Yeah. Well, I think that the Western medical system has a strong inclination to medicate. And it's no secret that there is a huge pharma interest behind it, which is what has been hindering the growth of complementary complementary therapies.
Yeah.
And this is the thing, they gave the name, this label to this kind of therapies, as in complementary, as in a coadjuvant to the main health
So
care.
you've got like a hierarchy in a way, what works. And I think medications for a very long time stayed at the top of that hierarchy. I think it's slightly changing perhaps, and people are talking about, acupuncture, for example. There is research that will links, not a lot of research, still there's a need to do more, but there is research linking maybe acupuncture and PTSD symptoms. So there might be some reduction in the symptoms that people are experiencing, or yoga or meditative practice, like that attention training as well. So there is some evidence there, and there needs to be more kind of evidence in terms of that to be implemented and integrated, because like you said, the way the system works is based on medical model heavily. So I think
model,
yeah, we're moving away from that a little bit, and we're like, let's make it more holistic, let's integrate something into this, and let's not that be all about medication. And that's my perspective in terms of like when I work with people, although there are times when people are so unwell because perhaps it's too late in terms of that preventative measure, and medication comes as a part, of the treatment.
This is the thing. The usual care system is a reactive, remedial system. And if you look into Japan, for example, they have this preventative way of health and illness. So they go to the park, they do yoga, and they do Tai Chi and things like that, and you can see these old people, like 85-year-olds and 90-year-olds, doing Tai Chi in the park. And it's very impressive. Whereas here 95-year-old people are loaded with tablets. Which they probably do also in Japan, some sort of medicine that they will take to maintain their health. But the difference is that the medicine, what I have learned, is that is less toxic and it has less side effects. This is another thing, with drugs, you have to also deal with the side effects. By the way, when acupuncture, I forgot to introduce myself. I forgot to introduce. So I'm Ana Guerrero from Ana Guerrero's Holistic Wellbeing. Have I done that or have I not?
I think if you didn't say what you actually do.
So I'm an acupuncturist, and before becoming an acupuncturist, I've been treating people with massage, which is a contact therapy, which I find very, very beneficial for people that have especially some sort of emotional trauma due to basically a lack of sense of feeling safe. When they go for a massage or for any sort of therapy where they're being touched, they put themselves in the vulnerable position of the receiver. For them, that's a huge step for them to take. And I always want them to acknowledge this and validate this for them. I always tell them, you are very courageous. I admire that. Let's get this going, And
so reducing that avoidance that actually is maintaining some of the kind of threat that they're feeling, or belief system, which we recognize in kind of therapies. So it's interesting from your point of view that you're saying like that gentle introduction to, okay, we know that's going to be difficult for you, but it's almost like they're overcoming that avoidance with you. I think sometimes it's hard because with some people, certain where you touch them might trigger that flashback and take them back to that moment. But I guess, like you said, you do that assessment beforehand anyway, and you have that information to kind of do that treatment sensitively and respond to anything that might be happening.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
have to be very tuned into your person's
yeah,
energy. And you mentioned something, what was it? Yeah, well, being in that, yeah, the avoidance
yes,
is such a key word, because they would prevent or avoid getting themselves into positions which puts them in the vulnerable. You know, these people that are so overloaded in the sympathetic nervous system, they would do
mm-hmm.
anything to
Yeah,
avoid being vulnerable, because there is
yeah,
a big fear of death. It's like,
mm-hmm.
you know, the feminine has been suppressed for all
Mm-hmm.
these many centuries, even millennia, you know. So now it's like we are kind of afraid of being vulnerable.
Yeah, definitely. That's kind of thing we don't want to be vulnerable. And I think in therapy with patients, that's what I recognize, and that it may be a barrier sometimes that you try to build that rapport and gently introduce them and kind of engage them in that work, because you have to talk about things that are so intimate to you. It's almost like taking your clothes off. I always say to people, it may feel like that to start with. It's going to get a little bit easier as we, progress. But like you said, the initial response is that barrier and that kind of like, I don't want to go there. This is so uncomfortable.
Yeah, this is why building rapport with your patients or your clients is so
Mm.
important. It's like
Yeah.
50% of the work you do is that.
Yes. Yes, certainly.
By making your client or your patient feel safe,
Mm.
so much. You've opened the door for them to explore, which is what it should be. It should be an explorative, creative,
Yeah.
active engagement into the healing process.
Yes.
But yeah, that's very relevant.
Just one thing that I wanted to mention as we were talking about, complementary therapies as acupuncture or yoga or even massage. I was thinking about that last night, and it's kind of, that time that you put towards is that gives you that chance to self-nurture. And I was thinking about how everybody talks about be kind to other people, but I think it's really important to be kind to yourself. So have that self-compassion and have that nurturing side. Like, I want to nurture myself. And when you go to have a massage or acupuncture, because I've been before, it gives you that time to nurture yourself, to look after yourself, to say to yourself, I'm important as well, I need to look after myself. So that gives you that kind of sense of looking after yourself, and maybe helps to build people's self-compassion, because that's very, very important as well.
Important. And the thing is, going back to the feminine thing,
Mm.
I've been reflecting on so much lately. Um, we barely allow it to come out and to express itself, even for women. Even women are struggling to notice their feminine, and there is we all have both masculine and feminine within us, and the masculine is the one that gives us the drive, the go go go, get, achieve, and push and chase, and it's amazing. It's such an amazing energy, and this is what the modern societies are built on, on this young masculine energy, and the feminine is still being suppressed in the background, and we just need to realize, I tell my clients all the time, the ones that come with sympathetic overload,
Mm.
I tell them, just take a few minutes a day, 10 minutes, 15 minutes a day, to stop and soften up.
Yeah.
I mean, women, in the women nag all the time, the women nag to the partners all the time, and guys are become avoidant because they don't want to, they don't want to hear it, because the woman is so engaged on the masculine energy, on the sympathetic overload, sympathetic nervous system overload, that she's on a, women are not built to run on the yang energy all the time. We're not built for that, and so it really affects us. And this is why we see a huge increase of things like chronic fatigue syndrome or hypothyroidism or other autoimmune diseases that mean that the body is slowly shutting down. And what's this gift from Zoom? Oh well. Okay.
It's really interesting that you say that, because I've done I'm really interested in clinical perfectionism, and we talk about that, but I think we don't talk about that enough. And there is very interesting research that talks about this global pandemic, but that is perfectionism. So that strive to achieve.
Yeah, and not show your weaknesses, and not show that you can't do it anyway. You have to be showing that you are strong, that you can do it, that
you're capable. And I think social media is driving that as well, especially for young people. So unless you're successful, then you're worth something. If you're not successful, then you're not worthy. And then that leads to people to kind of maybe developing some perfectionist traits. And then, that might lead to them working long hours. They then becoming workaholics, and then they don't look after their well-being. So obviously they're going to end up feeling exhausted, and that will have then very negative impact on their physical health. And you often find, perfectionists working long hours, doing a lot, putting a lot of energy, and then, as a result, they're making themselves ill.
Because, it gives them a sense of identity. As you said, they have to go out there and be somebody. If you don't work so hard, then you are, if you don't have a house, if you don't have a car, you're nobody, or whatever. It's draining, and there is only so much that our bodies can do. And women and men, we are different, and it's within the female population, all these illnesses are shooting off the roof. Our system, our body is not built for that. I mean, we can use this masculine yang energy, like I've done. I have, I'm well satisfied with where I am, and I've lived on my young masculine energy for a long time, and it has served me well. But I became exhausted, especially towards the end of my acupuncture degree. I nearly gave up. I just couldn't. I didn't have any more soul, and I've been shifting this, and now that I am, in a place where I'm happy, I am investing more time in making sure I don't develop any of these autoimmune diseases. Making sure that I rest, that I meditate, that I go for massages, that I go to the spa, to the jacuzzi. But because of the link of our lifestyle, the stories we tell ourselves, how we talk to ourselves, the language,
the critical voice.
Which can be very very damaging.
Yes.
And talking about chronic fatigue syndrome, I don't know if you wanted to say anything else before we welcome Leandra into the game.
No, I think I've said everything that I wanted to say. It's really interesting. I'm looking forward to hearing from Leandra and hearing about her experience.
Excellent. So let's get Leandra into the field. Hey! So Leandra Ashton, she is a Rada trained actress turned creativity and communications workshop facilitator. And after being diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, she became fascinated with holistic well-being and health, and trained to be a yoga instructor, transferring her acting training in body, breath, and voice and mind into holistic contexts. So welcome, Leandra.
Thanks. Fascinating conversation. So much of it I resonate with. I think, what you're describing is what happens to a person when they don't honor their feminine. And I just think it's so
Or the
refreshing.
masculine as well. When
Yeah.
when you don't honor your masculine, you might become withdrawn, depressed,
Mm-hmm.
things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think what's really exciting is number one, to be having a conversation using the terms masculine and feminine, because I feel like we're living in a world where we're not allowed to talk about these terms anymore. You're kind of deemed, if you say, are you a feminine woman? Are you a masculine man? There's all these interesting, I think, rather unhelpful energies around that, because these two energies do exist. They exist, and we can call them masculine and feminine. We can call them yin and yang. We can call them Shiva and Shakti. But there are energies that are polarities that exist in our world, and they are so vital to honor both of them. But from my experience, I grew up only honoring the masculine energy, because that's what's around us, as you said, in society. It's about striving, it's about achieving, it's about, I was the grade A student, as you said, Monika, like that perfectionism, like I was the grade A student. I went to, one of the best universities in the world. I then went to one of the best drama schools in the world. And I then got this amazing top agent, and I pushed and I set my own company up, and I strove, and then I collapsed.
Can I just cut you there and add that we born into this culture where we have to be this way, but it's not only the circumstances we're born in, it's our generational courses that are playing up in our actual life, such as, for example, women, being killed or tortured for studying. And this is not that far back in time. Women were not allowed to study. Women could not reject sexual intercourse, and women could not drive cars and so on. And so there is this intrinsic subconscious fear, whereas we don't want to put ourselves into the feminine or the vulnerable because of this terrifying, fear of death.
I guess, Monika, you would think of that as like the collective kind of energy, maybe, in that sort of psychological terms, right? Is that how you would see that? That sort of collective memory?
In terms of that feminine and masculine side, is that what you mean?
Yeah, just the collective memory of the feminine history of the history of women up to this point, really.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, and you can see that when you work with different ages, that's different, because what is relevant now, what was relevant 50 years ago, and how people grew up, the belief system is based on that. It was very different compared to now. And it's interesting that you said we move away from that feminine and masculine because we don't want to label, because now we are told you can be whoever you want to be. We don't have to label that. So it's kind of, people are moving away from that because that's this fear that you're not I don't know, you're not accepting people because people want to be just without labels, I suppose. Yeah.
And I think that's a really beautiful thing, that anybody can be whoever they want to be, and that's a wonderful, liberal, free place to be. I also think that we don't want to lose this beautiful polarity of these energies, right? Because that they exist in nature. The yin and the yang. We see it in the yin of winter, the retreating, the letting go, the emptiness, the receiving, and then the yang of summer with the fire and the blooming and the kind of the explosion of energy, and it's in nature and it's in us, and I think the journey that I've been on in the last 7 years is one of, how can I honor my feminine? How can I actually, I didn't even know that I had that in me before.
Right. Yeah. And you know what's curious? That is, you were saying that you had been engaged with your masculine energy from forever until you collapsed. And I want to hear more about that. But what's very interesting with what you just said is what I have observed, and I'm convinced about this: disease, illness, injury, they're a blessing.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, it was like the biggest awakening of my life. It was a huge awakening. And I think also there's this tendency in our modern day world of, if you're ill, then okay, let's fix it. Let's get a solution quickly. And of course we want everyone to get better, but it's a journey and it's a process. And to really, one of my mantras to get me through the real dark days of the early days of my chronic fatigue, when I couldn't do anything, I came up with this repetition of, this path is leading me home. And I didn't know how it was going to lead me home. I didn't know where I was going. I was completely lost. I didn't even have energy to make a cup of tea. But I knew that somehow there was a breaking down, and that in this seeming poison there was the medicine, and it would bring me back to myself even more. And over the years, when I've worked with people that have chronic fatigue, that for me is always the first step, is saying, you need to embrace this now. Like, this has come for a reason. Like, this is your awakening. This is your breakthrough. It's not your breakdown. There is more than a silver lining in this dark cloud. But can you actually lean into that? Do you have the bravery to lean into it and to fall apart? Because it's terrifying, because everything falls apart.
You have to allow it to fall.
It's really interesting because I often talk to people about people trying to fight something. And when you were talking about the feminine and the masculine, the way I understand that is, people always say, I don't want to cry, or I don't want to feel something because I need to be strong, because that's the masculine kind of, I need to be strong. But actually being vulnerable, being open, being kind of accepting the feeling, that feminine side, that actually makes you strong, like that even empowers you more. And from the moment you kind of accept and run with it, you can make the change. But if you're fighting it, you're creating that resistance and you're getting more and more tired. And as you were talking about your journey, I was thinking crashing and then rebuilding. So two kind of concept. And you said that really beautifully, like, that's what happened to me.
And I think there's something also really that I've learned over the last 8 years is the full spectrum feminine energy. When people say, oh, I don't want to say I'm feminine, and this is where I found yoga really helpful, because within yoga and within the Hindu pantheon, you've got a pantheon of goddesses, and they represent every aspect of femininity that you could possibly imagine. And the goddess archetype that I really related to in my breakdown was Kali. So she's the goddess of destruction. She's the goddess that rips everything apart and uproots and says no more. And I think that's what we're going through collectively right now, is that there is this Kali energy of uprooting. It's the fierce feminine energy that's saying, stop. We're not going to carry on in this way. We're going to uproot, and we're going to see what's really here, and we're going to build from this place of truth. But you have to first embrace that, and it's a little bit terrifying.
It requires courage, true courage.
And I think when you said something about people don't wanting to sound or look feminine, and why there is this like negative association, instead of kind of, like you said, let's embrace it, let's be proud, like you said, what if I cry in front of somebody? What's so bad about that? We've kind of tried to suppress that, and when we try to suppress that, we're creating more hurt as a result. But it's just interesting how there is that negative association, like, I don't want to be feminine because it's gonna look like I'm weak. So there is kind of that, if I behave this way, or if I show that maybe I'm vulnerable, then I'm going to be weak.
Yeah.
And that's not really true, but that's what accepted by the society.
Yeah, and also I hear a lot of people saying, well, I'm a woman, but I'm not feminine. And I don't know quite where to go, where to even begin with that, because it's these, as you said, Anna, these energies are in all of us, the masculine and the feminine energies, the yin and the yang. And to say I don't have that in me is to deny like a huge part of yourself.
Yeah, which
And
I
when you,
personally have done for
yeah,
most of my life. I
yeah,
didn't hang out with the girls in school because, I mean, let's face it, they were bloody boring. They would sit in the bench and slag everybody off, and whereas I used to play with the boys, football, basketball, just having a laugh, a little bit of banter. And so I grew up seeing the feminine and women as, you know, as boring, as I don't want to be part of that. They just, but I was seeing the toxic feminine, the one that slags people off, the feminine that is insecure. As you're growing up as a little girl, you haven't gotten there to the confident feminine yet. So but I was very observant and I didn't like that aspect of the feminine. So I chose to hang out with the boys. And I didn't have many female friends until recently. You guys, I love you so much. You're part of my so valuable feminine tribe. You are incredible women. You are passionate and knowledgeable. And I celebrate you. I celebrate you, ladies, my female friends at this point in my life. They're really nourishing my feminine energy. We are nourishing one another. And it's such a wonderful thing. I mean, I'm so grateful. Well, anyways, Leandra, how you overcame the chronic fatigue syndrome, didn't you?
yeah, I consider myself fully recovered from it, which
Okay, how did you do it, and what happened? And what happened when you shared your recovery story with others?
So it was a multi-pronged approach. It's not just one thing. Every time, my first sort of 3 trips to the GP, I was told that I was depressed. And I was, of course, offered medication. And I said, no, I'm not depressed. I know my body. I'm an actor. I know how my body feels. I can't move my body anymore. Something's not firing. And I'd had a very, very mild virus, very, very mild, that seemed to kind of just be the tipping point to move me into this dreadful state of fatigue and zero energy. And so then eventually I turned up at the GP and I met a GP who was just happened to be there. He wasn't supposed to be there. He was on call and he said, okay, let's look at some other things. And he actually physically examined me and he took blood tests. And he said, let's see what happens from these tests. They all came back totally normal. And he said, I think you've got chronic fatigue syndrome. And I said, don't tell me that, because that's the worst diagnosis you can have, because I know you can't get better from that. I've read about that.
This is the thing also with diagnoses that include the word chronic. That's a very dangerous wording that they are putting out there into the patient's head.
Yeah.
And when the patient is told this, they assume and they may accept this belief that is going to be forever.
Well, this was kind of my experience when I was lucky enough here in York. There's the Yorkshire Fatigue Clinic, which is a centre of excellence for people with chronic fatigue, and I think there are only a couple of them in the country, to be honest. So I was so lucky to have this here.
Big up,
yeah, and I went along and I had this incredible education basically in the nervous system. They educated me on the nervous system, on the parasympathetic, sympathetic, what happens. And I thought, oh, hang on, you're not telling me this is from stress, because this is physical, what I'm experiencing. But what I experienced there was very, very useful. And everything that they gave me, I basically took away and did, because of the perfectionist tendencies in me anyway, 10 times. So they said it's about nutrition, it's about resting, it's about building up gradually. And I thought, well, I'm going to look into this more and more and more. So I worked with an amazing nutritionalist and a naturopath. And the real turning point was doing a mineral hair analysis test. and she sent off a sample of my hair, and we found out that my levels of really vital minerals were rock bottom. And the kind of profile when you've got minerals that low, it was magnesium, sodium, selenium, really vital minerals. She said this is all to do with stress. When you've had long-term stress, it wears down this part, these minerals.
Yeah.
So my hypothalamus, adrenal, and what's this?
Thyroid.
Thyroid, hypothalamus, and adrenal kind of combination was totally out of whack. And when I went to the fatigue clinic for the first time, they said basically you need to help your body find homeostasis again. And I heard this word and I thought, that's yoga. And I thought yoga has been at the bottom of my to-do list for all these years because I've been so busy, doing everything that I've been doing. And so I thought I need to just follow this energy. So I did a lot of meditation. My yoga practice was basically rolling out my mat and crying on it to begin with. I couldn't do anything else. I was so utterly exhausted. And then slowly, with the help of the nutritionist, by bringing up my mineral levels, by totally changing my diet. I'd been a vegetarian. It hadn't worked for me, clearly. I suddenly was craving meat. I needed the meat to rebuild my adrenals because they were so depleted. Bone broth became a huge part of my life. Yeah. Really simple, old-fashioned, using that. Yeah. And also healing my gut. So the gut-brain axis and how vital that is. So healing my gut, probiotics, repopulating my gut, basically. But what was really interesting was as I was getting better, and it was work to get better. I was having to do my own research as well. But we'd have these gatherings in the clinic with my support group. I thought, my God, Leandra, you've ended up in rehab. This is where you've ended up. And one day, quite early on, one of the girls said, what you lot haven't understood yet is that you haven't grieved your old life and you're not going to get better. And I was so shocked by this. I was so shocked that because she'd had chronic fatigue for about 15 years and that she was stating that we weren't going to get better and that we just had to basically grieve what had gone. And in part of what she said was true. My old life had gone.
Yeah.
But the new life that I was building was actually going to be so much better.
Yes.
And this is something that I found very, very interesting as I got better, I would meet people or people would put other people in touch with me and say they've got chronic fatigue syndrome. And sometimes those people would be totally up for knowing how I'd done it. And they'd want to talk to me and they would want to, read the books that I suggested and all the rest of it. And then other people, I'd say, oh, I had chronic fatigue syndrome. And they would just look at me with this blank expression and smile as if I was a crazy person, as if you can't be better if you've had chronic fatigue syndrome. You can't have got better. Now, not only did I get better, but I ended up taking one of the biggest roles of my life on stage after not being on stage for 5 years. I then took on this lead Shakespearean role for a whole summer, having never done anything like that, for 5 years because I've been so ill. So I recovered, but what I find very interesting is the people that wanted to recover and the people that didn't. Yeah. And there was definitely two camps. Yeah. There were some people that didn't want to know that I'd got better, that wanted to discredit, they wanted to tell me that I didn't have chronic fatigue syndrome. And that's a very interesting thing. I guess, Monika, you've probably got something to say on that.
I was just listening, and it's fascinating to listen to you because as you were talking about your journey, and it was like, I'm in this dark place, but there is a huge ball of hope. There is something there, like there's this hope, even though you just on your knees, it's difficult, but you're still hopeful and you open to that journey to actually, I want to get better. I need to get better. This is what I want to do. And there was this drive to actually try things out and persist. Because I think, because the medical kind of system and how we deal with things, we want a fix.
Quick one.
And
Yeah.
that doesn't work sometimes, because sometimes you need time and persistence, and sometimes it's very, very hard. And that I can relate to that in terms of therapy treatment. It's hard, it's lengthy, it works, but it's very difficult because you have to dedicate your time to that process. And you did that, and you've adapted it to fit your needs as well. So, and you're very much in tune with your body. You do listen to your body, and that really helped you to kind of stay on track and recognize that actually what I'm doing here, it does work. But it's interesting how some people just blankly refuse. It's almost like they identify themselves with that diagnosis. It works as like self-fulfilling prophecy, because this is what I've been told, therefore I am this. It's interesting, your journey, Leandra, and how, you know, people don't want to listen to you, even though you're successful. You kind of like, you're like, look at me, I'm evidence. I'm like giving you evidence. I'm the evidence that what I've done actually worked. And why wouldn't you kind of try it out yourself?
I think it kind of ties in with where we're at globally right now as well, is that, you know, a lot of people don't want to take responsibility for their own health. It's as simple as that. They don't want to take responsibility for it. They want somebody else to tell them what to do, for whatever reason, because they feel lost, because they don't trust themselves. And for me, we're at this really, really vital point in humanity where, are we going to, in a way, hand over all our authority to other people who tell us what's best for us? Because if I'd handed my authority over to the doctors, I would have been on antidepressants and maybe never got better.
Yeah.
You know, do I do that? Do we do that now collectively, or do we actually take responsibility for our own health and for the health of our families and our children and our elders? You know, the people that need our help and assistance. And I just wanted to. This book was a huge part of my recovery. Okay, I just wanted to share this. This is called The Last Best Cure, and it's by Donna Jackson Nakazawa. And she had this most awful autoimmune system issue, and she healed herself. And this was a huge inspiration for me, because she healed herself from an autoimmune condition through mindfulness, yoga, and acupuncture. And she went to her doctor. She's an American. She went to her doctor. She had all the medication. She was on loads of medication. Her bloods were in this dreadful state. And then she got a new doctor, and this doctor said, how about we try this? And at the beginning of the book, you find her lying on the landing, having carried the washing up to the top of the landing, and her daughter is so used to seeing her on the landing, she just steps over her. And I read that first bit, and I thought, that's me. I have to lie down when I get to the top of the stairs. And at the end of the book, she's cycling with her daughter beside her. And she couldn't have believed that she could have done that, you know. And there were stories like that. When this girl at the fatigue group said this thing about you're never going to get better, it made me so angry. I went home and I started Googling, okay, people who have recovered from chronic fatigue. Who are these people? And then I found this book as well through my sister-in-law. And we need those stories of hope, because if we're being told from outside all the time, you're not going to get better, or you need to be scared of this virus or this whatever, you need to behave in this way, then we are handing all our power over to other people.
Which is a cultural thing that we've been under for centuries with religion, for example, you know, the belief that there is a God that can, you know, if you don't act accordingly to whatever rules, then you'll go to hell, you know. You know, if something good happens in your life, you are like, thank God, if you know, I know you helped me. No, you've done that. If that thing happened, which is amazing in your life, and you worked for it, then you worked for it. It's not only just taking the responsibility for the negative or the bad stuff, but it's also taking accountability and responsibility and sovereignty about the things that you achieve for yourself, instead of giving your power away to an external figure. And you know, this comes from religion, and the way we see the doctor is like a doctor slash God, you know, what they say goes to church. And this is why the healthcare practitioners should really look into the language they use when they treat patients, because this chronic word, it takes the hope out of the picture.
Yes, yeah, it does. And in social work previously, I was a social worker, and I was, as I was leaving social work, they were talking about person-centered approach, but person-centered approach been there for me for a very, very long time, with Carl Rogers saying, you know, people know what is good for them. People instinctively know, and that really stayed with me. And so when I started doing training to be a therapist, we do use standardized treatment protocols, but I've learned, and what is really important is you individualize them. So you are actually working with the person, and you are exploring with the person what works for you, what can we gain from your experience, what are your strengths, how we can incorporate that into treatment. Because I'm not telling you what to do, I'm trying to work with you to find solution. I've got tools, but then I want you to bring your experience and your expertise to the table, and then we are working together as a team. And I think that's really, really important. But also, when you were talking about crashing, Leandra, and then doing yoga and doing meditative practice, and I was just thinking about that balance that, we talk about work, play, rest, and because you are in that cycle of achieving, you're only working, so that balance is totally destroyed. And then you gave yourself permission to, let's relax, let's look after myself, let's nurture myself, really. And you brought that balance back, and that's how your body healed as a result. And probably that then affected your perfectionism, because you're no longer on that kind of ride to succeed all the time. You're like, there are other things that are important in my life, which is my well-being, my physical health, how I feel, and I'm important as well.
And that's success. That is the real success, and that's the real wealth. Yeah. Right. So talking about books, there is a book I would like to recommend. I love it.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I've got my pen ready.
Magic in Practice by Garner Thompson, with no P. Thompson. He's one of the creators and developers of medical neuro-linguistic programming, and they talk about the power of language in therapy. And there is something here that I would like to read. Is a story that talks about how Western medical systems deal with disease. So it says here, a gifted young medical student strolling along the banks of a river with his professor when they heard the cries of a drowning man. Being young and fit, the student leaped in and dragged the man to safety. A few meters further along, to their surprise, they spotted another man swept up in the current and screaming for help. Again, the student plugged into the rescue. Only minutes later, the same thing happened. The now drenched and exhausted student dragged the victim to safety and gasped, "I don't know how many times I can keep doing this." The professor pondered for a moment and then said gently, "Perhaps you should run ahead and stop whoever is pushing them." So instead of trying to deal with the symptoms and rescuing the person over and over with a pill or whatever, we just need to go and see who is pushing these people into the water. And this is a self-discovery process. Illness, disease, injury, it's an opportunity for self-discovery, growth, reconnection, arriving, sovereignty, and so much more. I thank you both for coming in today. I love you, ladies. Yes, I'm sure we are going to continue this conversation in our own time together, because there is so much about it, and I talk to my clients about this all the time. And like you said, like you mentioned, Monika, one of the questions in the consultation form when we do the consultation with the patient is what has worked for you so far? What do you do that works? So for example, if it's pain, is it heat or cold, or eating better or sleeping more, so we encourage the patient or the client to look within. And what's so funny, I wanted to mention this and I nearly forgot. When we were talking about looking externally for answers, giving our power to an external figure, we have to encourage the clients or patients to turn the question inwards. So many clients come to me and they're like, oh, I have a pain here or there. Why is that? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not with you 24/7. I always tell them, you know exactly what it is. So I encourage them to turn the question inwards. And I had this friend of mine who came for treatment. And normally his body temperature is totally fine, but this time his feet were cold. And he said, Anna, can you please cover my feet? They feel really cold. And I'm like, yeah, of course. So I cover his feet. And then he goes on to tell me that he's been feeling this cold, he doesn't know where it's coming from. And because I know him, I was there, and like a minute later, because I know him, I tell him, dude, you've been swimming in the river for 2 weeks every day in the middle of bloody winter. Of course. And I said, man, you knew where this cold was coming from. So what shocks me is that impairment. Like, he's a super conscious man. He's very spiritual. He does yoga every day. He's very fit. He is healthy. He's very conscious. And still, he asked me where his cold was coming from. So anyway, his diagnosis was an invasion of cold, obviously, in the channels. I gave him a few points that he can stimulate and use moxa to warm up the system. Moxa is a Chinese herb that you burn near the points. And yeah, so, this is what's really funny. Don't ask me. I don't know.
I think so many of the answers are within, aren't they? And for me, as a facilitator, I just try and hold a space for people to find their own answers, and I'm sure that's the same with all of us. We don't have to tell people the answers, just hold a space enough for them to find their answers, and that answer may be coming back to full health. Their journey may be that they don't go back to full health. It's not up to us to decide. It might not even be up to them to consciously decide, but it's just all we can do is hold a space for them to have that exploration.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Power to the people.
Thanks, Anna. It's been great. Monika, lovely to chat.
Yeah.
Really nice listening to your story, Leandra. And yeah, I think I've learned quite a lot today. And thank you for inviting me to this, Anna. I've really enjoyed it. And I think it's really important to get everybody, different professionals together and get their perspective on things, so we can work together and we can integrate things rather than working kind of separately. I think that's really important.
100%. Coming
Thank
together and power to the people. Okay, ladies, stay passionate and keep exploring and keep learning, and so will I. Okay, take care of yourselves. All the viewers, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this. Kiss, kiss. Bye-bye.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.